Live from the American Gulf Coast, it's the Dave Nemo Show.
And as promised, the guys from Crete Carrier are joining us. Our good friend Tim Aschoff, who of course is the president of Schaefer and the COO of Crete. And Gary Adams is with us on the program this morning. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Gary and I have something in common, although I guess he beat me by maybe a couple of years. He was diagnosed in 2012 with sleep apnea, and he went through the Crete Sleep Study Program. Gary and I also have another thing in common. He was Navy, I was Army, but we're both veterans, so we want to thank him for his service. And we're going to talk to Gary and Tim about sleep apnea, not rules and regulations and all of that. We're going to go to the human side of sleep apnea here this morning, and we'll be right back with Tim Aschoff and Gary Adams. Well, it's time to connect with Crete here on the program this morning. And our good friend Tim Aschoff is with us, COO of Crete and president of Schaefer. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning. Glad to be here. I hope you celebrated Halloween well last night and survived unscathed.
We did, but I think it's almost kind of universal. We had less kids this year than ever before, and I kind of feel that's I've been hearing from around the country that's kind of the thing going on. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think what we're kind of seeing, and I have some kids of trick-or-treating age, it's more of them getting together at friends' house and more having of a Halloween party than going out and trick-or-treating. So I guess it's a sign of the times.
Yeah, I think it must be. It must be. Well, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, Tim, and talked a little bit about Gary. We're going to talk to Gary in just a moment. But, it's your job to introduce Gary officially, so I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, and we're glad to have Gary on with us this morning. Gary's been with Crete Carrier since 2010, one of our good over-the-road drivers out there working hard for us and the whole country every day. And what we like about Gary, too, is that he's a driver of ours that through an investment we made back in 2010 in instituting our own sleep apnea program, was able to take advantage of that and the sleep studies we provide at a couple of our own terminals, and really, try to understand his personal health issues and understand the impact that has on him for his own health and safety, and go through the program, get treatment, and now have the positive benefits with that, and having been diagnosed in 2012 to be treating with sleep apnea successfully and feeling better and being safe out there on the road. So we appreciate him being on the team and for the investment he's made in his own health throughout the years.
Well, Gary, welcome to the program. Good morning.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the intro, Tim.
One of the things that Tim mentioned that you got diagnosed, you're in the program, but one of the things that you have said about your sleep apnea diagnosis is that you feel as if being diagnosed with it and then going through the treatment has actually saved your life. That's a huge statement. What did you kind of flesh that out a little bit for us?
Well, I had noticed prior to being diagnosed that I was fatigued a lot, and I had started gaining weight, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't know at the time that I had symptoms that related to sleep apnea. I didn't really have any knowledge of it. So when I went to our Salt Lake terminal and went through the sleep study and everything, I woke up the next morning feeling brand new. I mean, I felt great, and I knew exactly why. And I'm really glad it happened. When you get fatigued and you start doing things, people get used to doing things. It kind of snowballs on you where you don't really, like maybe you get a little pain in your knee and a year later you can't walk, because you ignore it. So I didn't realize until afterwards that I had those symptoms and that I needed the treatment. I'm really glad I went through the program. It worked out great. So, that's really it in a nutshell.
Sort of like that old adage, you don't know you feel bad until you feel better, right?
That's true. That's really true.
So fatigue.
Yeah, I had, there were. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. There's a bit of a delay on the phones, so that's why we sort of have that little bit of a clash there. But go right ahead, Gary.
Well, I was just going to say, if you've ever been out driving around in your car and, maybe you stop at a red light or a stop sign and you keep going and maybe you go 2-3 blocks and you're like, wait a minute, did I stop at that light? And that is a very scary thing. That's why I say, going through Crete's program probably saved my life, or quite possibly, the lives of others. If I'd have done something through fatigue, inattentiveness, I might have, ran a red light. It's very possible. It's a very big safety issue. And, my time in the Navy, in the aviation branch, I was heavily into safety. I was a safety rep for a couple of squadrons, and, you have to be on top of things. And I just didn't realize what was going on. So after the study, and, I realized I was a lot better, a lot more alert, awake, started losing weight, and it was great. I'm really glad I did it. I'm glad Crete has the program because it's turning out to be a really fantastic thing. I just got a new machine, as a matter of fact, a couple of months ago there at Salt Lake.
Tim, Gary brought up something that we all know, but I think it doesn't get said quite enough. There's an old adage about, you're talking about airplanes. I'm talking about commercial planes here, guys, but when the flight attendant comes on, they tell you when the little mask falls out of the ceiling, put yours on first and then put on a child's or someone who needs some help. You can't help them if you're passed out. So you have to pretty much take care of yourself first before you can take care of others. But Tim, Gary really hit on something. For most people in a regular workaday type job situation, if they die because of sleep apnea, well, it's probably just going to be them. But because of the amount of time that drivers spend out on the road, sharing the road with others, that really puts a lot of responsibility on a driver, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, and as Gary alluded to, I mean, one of the main impacts of sleep apnea is daytime sleepiness, fatigue, cumulative fatigue, and as he mentioned, as we started hearing from our drivers back in really 2008, 2009, and seeing some things that were going on with them related to this, and really started researching, what we could do to help them, is that fatigue factor that Gary's talking about really kind of, for lack of a better word, was maybe sneaking up on some drivers, because it is, as Gary said, it's like, well, you have a small ache or pain here, and you just kind of live with it, and you go on to the next day, and so it's the same thing with kind of some sleep deprivation. It's one night of it you might not notice, 2 nights you maybe notice a little bit more, and then 3 nights you're kind of used to it, and you don't kind of understand exactly what state you're in. So we helped to develop a program with some experts here at the company to say, how do we help, first of all, with awareness and education, because that is sometimes the hardest thing for somebody to understand, is that, why do I maybe feel the way I do at times, or do I even feel that way? And then what does that mean, and what do I do about it? And then to certainly make, anytime you're talking about, drivers, not only their health, but their livelihood on being able to be qualified on the road, is, okay, well, what does this mean for me? What does it mean as far as my medical qualification, as far as, am I going to have time off the road? Am I going to have impact my earnings or otherwise? So we wanted to take into account, as you mentioned, all those human factors beyond just the pure health diagnosis, and understand, the impact it has on that driver's, safety, as we mentioned, and their own health. And so it is one of those important subjects that's certainly getting a lot of attention lately from a regulatory standpoint, as you mentioned, but really need to understand it from a human standpoint, as we've been discussing.
Indeed. Gary, you mentioned that you felt tired during the day. You did gain some weight. What about snoring? Did you do a lot of snoring?
Well, my wife told me, we were talking about that yesterday. She said that I actually started snoring. We've been married almost 20 years. And she said about eight years or so, I think, into it, she said I started snoring heavily, and, more than usual, and I had no idea. And, so when I went through the program, when you have a nostril pillow assembly on your head, you can't snore, because you have to have your mouth closed. And with me, my mouth closes automatically. Otherwise, the air that's being forced into your system goes right out your mouth. So, it's a good thing to me. And if you're not snoring, you're breathing better, and I was having headaches, all kind of stuff, and I just didn't realize what the cause was, and I went through the program, and now I do. I endorse it 100%. I'm thinking it's a really good thing. It's a smart thing for anybody who wants to be a professional driver to do. It's, it's painless. With Crete, it's free. So I mean, what's the problem? I hear people complaining about it all the time. I'm like, what are you afraid of? Go do it. Can't hurt.
Well, I got to tell you guys, my neighbors told me I snored. It was so loud, rattled the windows. But I had the same thing going on, guys, and I've got a CPAP, love it. But, you just I was going to ask you the next question, Gary, and you kind of answered it already, but I kind of want to back up just a little bit. You mentioned that you did not have to pay for the test or anything. One of the things that is on the table in terms of the controversy about sleep apnea and the treatment thereof is the cost, and it is costly. There is one estimate that it's about $3,000. ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, they basically came up with a average $1,200 price tag on testing. So, Gary, you did not pay for that. Tim, how is that possible?
Well, it's possible because, as I mentioned, when we were looking at sleep apnea and the impact it had on our drivers and their overall safety and well-being, we did look at the cost. And to a driver, there's a couple of real major costs. You mentioned the cost of the test itself, and that is right. It's that average of $1,200. I think is right in line with what we were seeing, maybe a little bit more depending on the part of the country you're in. So that was one piece of it, but the other piece of it was time. And, as with any other medical procedure, once you know you need to have it, you need to get it scheduled at in this case, a sleep lab to get done, which could have taken, we were finding at that time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks to get in to the sleep lab. Then once you had the test, you had to have a qualified medical doctor specializing in sleep medicine read that, and that may have taken another 2, 3, 4 days. And then they had to get you back in to have that consult. So we were seeing drivers being generally off the road, 4 or 5 weeks to get that done. So there were two major costs that we saw that were impacting our drivers. And we said, how do we manage that? And certainly, what do we do to make sure that our drivers can cope with this? Because in some cases it's a very positive life change, as Gary mentioned, but there's this transition period, and a part of that transition period is the financial cost. And we at that point said, let's make an investment in our drivers. Let's make an investment in their health, their well-being. And we contracted with a third-party sleep provider to actually put sleep labs right in our facilities. As Gary mentioned, we have one in Salt Lake City, one down in our Wilmer, Texas facility, and New Kingstown, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg area. And by doing that, we were able to provide sleep studies for our drivers at our own terminals. And basically, they can come in late one evening, late afternoon, have the sleep study that night. If they don't have sleep apnea, they're out that day and they're on the road. We have a contract with doctors that read those right away that morning, so we don't have to wait for a doctor to read those. If they have sleep apnea, they're there for one more night to start treatment and make sure that everything works well with their PAP device, and then back on the road in literally 2 or 3 days. So that's a cost to the company, as you mentioned. If you're paying $1,200 a sleep study for literally we've done thousands of tests over the last 6 years. It was an investment we decided to make, but the investment in our drivers' health and safety is worth that return we get to have people like Gary out there on the road living a healthy life, being productive for himself and his family, and it's always gratifying. And there are many Garys that I have come through my door that maybe at first were a little bit leery about sleep apnea, and again, it's a little bit about awareness, and they're more scared of it because they don't know a lot about it. But once they've gone through the test, had that positive experience, now getting sleep, really appreciate the investment we're making in their health.
Gary Adams and Tim Aschoff are with us, and of course we are connecting with Crete here this morning, and we'll be right back with the guys in just a moment. Tim Aschoff is with us on the program, and Gary Adams, is with us as well. Gary is driving with Crete. Went through the Crete Sleep Study program at the terminal out in Salt Lake City, and is doing real well with his CPAP. But Gary, one thing leads to another. Good basically multiplies. And I was just wondering, in terms of life before and after CPAP, and there is a life before and after CPAP, and anybody that has gone through the programs and is on a treatment, they'll know what I'm talking about. Before CPAP, did you exercise very much at all? And has that changed now that you've gotten past that and are sort of in a new life, really?
Yes, sir. Before I was doing sleep apnea or, went through the program, I didn't really exercise too much other than at home. I own property, so I did, normal yard work and stuff. But, no, not per se. But afterwards, yes, I started walking. I carry a small set of dumbbells in the truck with me. I exercise every day. And it's helped me out a lot. I've lost, since I went through the study and then, through the diabetes thing later, I've lost about 98 pounds. So that's a good thing. I actually feel better. I breathe better. It's just better all around. I can't speak well enough of it. I don't have the words for it, but I think it's a good thing. And everybody that complains about it, I just think they don't know what they're talking about. I think they need to go through the study and see what happens. And then, make a decision.
Understood. Tim, I wasn't surprised to hear his answer because, as you get on that positive track, you want to keep going down that positive track. You've talked to a lot of drivers who have gone through the program. Is that kind of a typical thing that you hear from drivers in terms of the lifestyle change?
Very much so, and again, it kind of goes back to a little bit of they didn't know what they didn't know, so to speak, and just having, as Gary mentioned, a good night's rest and just the positive impacts that can have on your overall health, gives you that extra energy to feel like, well, yeah, I can get out of the truck and I can walk around, the truck stop or around my tractor trailer or, just do some things when they're at home. I've had a lot of them talk to me about, I love going home now and playing with my grandkids. Before I wanted to go home and kind of just sit in the chair and feel like I needed to recharge. Now when I'm at home, I have, the energy to do a lot of other things. So it really can be a lifestyle impact, and as Gary mentioned, you don't really know what the impact is going to be sometimes until you actually start the treatment.
We kind of compare the human body to the truck components, the truck engine, the blood supply and cholesterol with the oil system, the cooling system with dirty and clogged filters, that kind of stuff. And when it comes to sleep, it's tantamount to bringing your truck into the shop. You certainly can't have a successful operation if your truck isn't being maintained when you go to sleep. And Gary, I'm sure they explain this to you in the lab and all. Your body actually goes into the shop for repairs and refurbishment, in a sense. Any things that are like if you're working out, you're tearing little muscles and they get repaired. Things are checked, systems are checked, problems are taken care of while you sleep. Your body can't do that while you're awake. It's doing other stuff. So sleep is incredibly important. And because your body now is in better shape because of sleep, and any physiologist, any person with a gym, any exercise guru will tell you the most important thing about exercise is sleep. So thank goodness you're on the right track, and thank goodness so many drivers at Crete Schaefer are on the right track. And let me ask you that classic ending question, Gary. Would you have anything to say to drivers who are resistant to participating in a sleep study?
Well, I understand there's scientific evidence that, guys with a large body mass index and so on and so forth, there's a reason why the Crete Carrier and Schaefer are wanting people to go get tested for this because there's scientific evidence behind it. And I've done a lot of reading about it. I'm not an expert, but I can tell you that it's true. So, if you get a message from Crete Carrier saying, how about go here and do this sleep study, people, a lot of, especially older guys are not used to changing things in their life. They got a certain way of doing things. They're kind of resistant to that kind of thing. Or maybe it's, a little leery about saying, well, having some kind of physical ailment is a weakness or whatever. I don't know. But I look at it. I don't look at it that way at all. I'm totally opposite. I thought, well, this could be a help. So I went through the study. When I got up this morning, the young man that did the test, he was taking the little electrodes off of me, and he said, "How you feel?" I said, "I feel like $1 million." And he goes, he said, "You had 7 hours straight of deep REM sleep." And he said, you were exhausted. And I said, I guess so, because I feel good now. So it worked out great. I mean, I think, I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a terminal, guys sit around and they gossip and all that. And I remember one man in particular, he was way younger than I am, but he was a very large guy, saying, I got to go to Wilmer, I believe, and said, I got to go through a sleep study. I think I'm going to quit. And I'm like, why? And he said, well, I don't want to do this. He says, I think it's a scam. I said, it's not a scam. Trust me. He said, how do you know? I said, I went through it. And so he asked me a few more questions. 3 months later, I ran into this guy at another terminal, and I said, did you go through the sleep study? He goes, yep. I said, how you doing? He says, I'm having trouble with the mask. I guess he had a full mask. And he says, I'm having a little trouble getting used to the mask. He says, but I feel better. He said, I feel a lot better. And he says, I'm actually glad I talked to you about it. So, it depends on your attitude about things.
It does. Attitude is everything. Gary, we're out of time here, but hopefully you'll be able to get back with us again. Tim, thank you as always. Tim Aschoff.
You're welcome. Great to be on.
Tim Aschoff, Gary Adams with Crete, and we'll be right back after news and weather.